Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the National Library of Australia and to the launch of a wonderful new publication by Christabel Blackman, Charles and Barbara Blackman, A Decade of Art and Love. Isn't that a great title? My name is Emma Jolly. I'm a Senior Advisor in the Collection Branch here at the Library, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this very special event. As we begin, and always at the beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that we are actually on the land of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and through them to all Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I would like to thank them particularly for the stewardship of the land of which I grew up on, and on which we meet tonight. Tonight's event is a celebration of two remarkable Australians, Barbara and Charles Blackman, whose contribution to the creative arts in Australia across numerous fields is matched only perhaps by their love story. It is particularly poignant as Barbara passed away recently, aged 95, and the Library would like to express its condolences to her family and friends for their immense loss. A Decade of Love and Art is a celebration of her parents' first 10 years together. It is based in part on a folder of letters sent and received by Barbara and Charles before and after their marriage. Barbara Blackman was a celebrated writer whose notable works include All My Januaries, Pleasures of Life and Other Essays, and Portrait of a Friendship, The Letters of Barbara Blackman and Judith Wright. However, she was also a poet, librettist, radio broadcaster and interviewer, artist model, activist, and a dedicated philanthropist, to name just a few of her talents. In 2012, she was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to the arts and to the community as a supporter of artistic performance through philanthropic contributions and as an advocate for people who are blind and partially sighted. Charles Blackman is one of the most celebrated Australian figurative artists of the 20th century. Noted in particular for the Schoolgirl, Avonsley and Alice in Wonderland series of the 1950s, he made a significant contribution to the post-war story of Australian art. His work is represented in Australia's major galleries in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Tate Gallery in London. In 1977, he was appointed an Officer of the Order of the British Empire for services to art and culture in Australia. Barbara and Charles met in 1949 and married in 1952. Christabel's book, set against the burgeoning cultural arts scene of 1950s Melbourne, is meticulously researched and beautifully produced, and reveals her parents' devotion and blazing creativity. In addition to the narrative of their lives, A Decade of Art and Love also features over 160 works from Charles, as well as never-before-seen sketches, letters, documents, and photos. We are especially pleased to be launching this book tonight, as both Barbara and Charles have contributed significantly to the Library's collection and are represented across several collecting branches at the Library. The Library's relationship with the Blackmans goes back as far as the mid-1960s and continues with the latest transfer of Barbara's personal papers received in March this year, with another instalment occurring at the end of this year. In addition to her personal papers, we hold portraits of her, 4 different oral history recordings with her, as well as many of her publications, collaboration and reviews. Barbara also conducted 157 oral histories for the Library, this time as the interviewer, recording the lives and memories of prominent artists and literary figures. For this work, she was awarded the Australasian Sound Recording Association's Award for Excellence in Broadcasting, and the collection is considered as a significant record of 20th century art history. Similarly, the Library holds various portraits, exhibition catalogues, biographies, critiques relating to Charles and his work, as well as 3 different oral histories with him in 1965, 1979 and 1985. The correspondence and work of both Charles and Barbara are also represented in the Library's broader collection of personal papers, including the papers of Judith Wright, Sidney Nolan, James Gleeson, Rosemary Dobson, Alex and Rosalind Poignant, and Kate Fitzpatrick, to name but a few. Christabel Blackman has clearly inherited the talents of both of her parents. She is a successful artist whose works are held in both public and private collections in Australia and overseas, and is trained in fine art conservation. She is a published author across books, newspapers and catalogues. As the daughter of Barbara and Charles, she was perfectly placed to tell a key part of their story. Jeremy Thomas was a close friend of Barbara's, with a strong interest in literature and the arts, and I'm sure he will provide Christabel with thoughtful and insightful questions. It is my pleasure to now hand over to Jeremy and Christabel.
Look, thank you very much for that introduction, and also thank you more generally to the Library for hosting this event tonight. Barbara had links to many of the cultural institutions in this town. She was, I think, one of the first advocates for a portrait gallery in Canberra. She donated many works to the National Gallery and to galleries all over Australia. But I think with your opening, you really touched on what it was with Barbara. This was a really special place for her. I do wonder if her ghost is here with us somewhere tonight. People with greater psychic power than I have might be able to see that, but I can assure you she won't be in the back row. She'll be up the front here, or maybe even right next to us. That's right. So if anyone sees a little purple haze, that's going to be Barbara. So thank you. And yes, she gave so much to this institution over such a long time. It's fantastic to be here. And why am I here? I probably should say a few words of introduction about myself, if that's all right, Christabel. But yes. Yeah, my name's Jeremy. I knew Barbara for about the last 30 years of her life. As many people would know, she lived in Kangaroo Valley for much of the 80s and the 90s. And there she had a kind of cultural centre, a beautiful property with a house with a single bedroom where she lived with her husband, large kitchen, wonderful dining room, and then a lot of little houses around the property where people could stay. And there was a library and a theatre and all sorts of things. And in the mid-90s, my brother went down there to live with her and to be her general live-in secretary, dog's body, cook, all sorts of other things. And so I first met your mother probably in 1994, came down a number of times to visit my brother, and then I moved to Canberra in 2000 from Sydney, and Barbara followed me in 2002, and I ran into her in this very building, had an opening, had a bit of a chat with her, reintroduced myself, and kind of offered to come and help her with her papers like my brother had done. And that was going to last a few weeks, but really what it led to was 22 years of beautiful friendship, of many dinners, of, I was going to say glasses, but it's probably more bottles or vats of wine with Barbara. I helped her a lot with the papers and so on. Read a lot to her. Wind in the Willows, David Copperfield, Passage to India, my favourite, Diary of a Nobody. But a great love developed between us. And I met Christabel, who was living in Europe at the time, when she came to visit Barbara in Canberra. And then when Christabel moved back to Australia, saw her much often. So it's a very personal and close connection between Barbara and me, and also between me and some of the other Blackmans. But let me start by saying congratulations on this wonderful book.
Thank
and
you.
My aim here is to make sure that you have a little blush, Christabel. This is a book, but it is more than that. It's a number of books. It is a biography of two of the most important creative Australians from the second half of the last century. It's also a history of really interesting people, a sort of cultural and artistic group of people in the 1950s, with many, many names that would be known to people here today. It's also a social history. You delve into Barbara and Charles's childhood and what their upbringing was like, and it's a childhood that's very different from pretty much everyone these days, I think. It's also a coffee table book. If you open it up, there's beautiful images throughout, and it's the sort of thing you can leave in the house and your guests are going to start flipping through. And it's also a story about you, and you are very frank sometimes in your disclosures about life in the Blackman family. But it's also a beautiful love story. So are you blushing yet?
Yeah.
Because there's something more than that as well I wanted to say about, is that it's almost like a work of art to me as well. This is kind of kind of a collage. And so what you've done is that you've started with the works, the letters from your dad to your mum, and you brought in these incredible photographs, many paintings and drawings from your dad, oral histories and all sorts of other things, and you've kind of stitched it all together, as I say, like a collage. So it's a marvellous book. Thank you so much for writing it. It just told me so much about Barbara that I didn't know. Yeah. So what I wanted to start with is the origins of this book. So all books have an origin, and I'd be really interested in you talking about how you came to write this book and a little bit about the process.
Well, I think the origin is probably just me being their daughter, but specifically, I sort of always had the idea on the back boiler that I'd like to do this book. And I'd done interviews in 2003 with various people, and I always, I had letters and things in it. But when Barbara turned 90, and there's an image of her, and she turned 90 here, I went down to stay with her for a week, and I took her a coat made out of, that I'd knitted from different cottons for her, because she was allergic to wool. And I thought, well, I'll make something creative and nice for my mother. And I took about 10 years to make it. I kept bringing it out to Australia and then I'd take it back, one of those things. But I finally finished it and took it to her. And we spent about a week together just sort of enjoying and chatting and receiving guests and listening to music and, having coffee and champagne and sort of the general life at Barbara's home. And you would have been there for dinner a couple of times. And we came across these letters, this folder that was with a pink bow, and I opened it up and it was full of all my father's letters, his love letters to her, when he would have been in his 20 or something. I thought, that looks like my dad's writing, but it sort of looks like a young man. And then I started reading them, and I went through systematically over that week and read her all the letters, one by one, and just in any order. And it was a sort of delving for us both into this, the beginning of a meeting with Charles that changed her life and changed his life. And it was all written down.
How did she respond to the letters after all these years? I imagine she hadn't had them read to her for a long time.
Well, when we weren't reading the letters, she was listening sort of on loop almost to the cabaret song, Who Cares, So What? so she was a bit, sort of blasé. I'd be reading, I'd go, oh, that's the most amazing letter. And she'd go, oh, how sweet. Yes, that's nice. So she just wasn't into it like I was.
Yeah.
I was sort of, I'd brought up this incredible sort of story of the past and how they'd met, and then later on me. And so for me, emotionally, it was really important, as well as I could see historically it was important. The stories that were being told in the letters, and the love story, and the story of those times, and the letters themselves that were documents that were, sometimes they were just written on the back of a telegram form, because he had nowhere else to write, or a piece of paper he'd nicked out of a yacht club, or sometimes on an aerogram when he could afford it. So that it was just an inspiration. I said, this has got to be something.
And look, I know that coat. I know that coat was worn very often and strangely quite often worn with a beret that I crocheted for it. And I guess there's something so special about making something like that for somebody.
There is.
I remember when I was a youth, there was a premier called Barry Unsworth in New South Wales, and to a young person, he was definitely not cool. And this is coming from someone wearing corduroys and buckle-up shoes, but I remember he was asked by a journalist on one occasion about why he wore cardigans rather than proper suit jackets and so on. And his answer was, they were made by my wife and there is a kiss in every stitch. So it's It's a lovely thing, and she
It
loved
is.
that until the end of her life. It was
It
a
is.
beautiful thing to give her. This could have been quite a different book. Like it could have been, and this is kind of what I was expecting before I'd even seen it. It was going to be about edited letters, and it is, you know, it's
I
actually
wanted that.
so much more than that.
I wanted that. Like, I didn't want to have to do all the work I had to do for this. I just wanted a little tiny book,
Yeah.
like the Pillow Book of Love book, a little tiny book that you could put in your dressing gown pocket. You know, it's something that was easy to do. Just put the letters together, and that was it. And I went to, first of all, I spoke to a friend who's the director of Heidi, Kendra Morgan. She said, "Oh, I'll introduce you to the people at Thames and Hudson."
Yeah.
And I told the story about the letters and how I want to do this book. And I said, and then Charles and Barbara went on and did this, this, and this, you know. And they wrote back and said, we want the this, this, and this as well. You know,
Okay,
we,
all right.
we don't want, you know, it's great, the letters, but they wanted more of the story. So I just went, okay, like, no more than the Antipodean Manifesto, because otherwise I will never do it. I'll be one of those people who you meet who says, I'm writing a book. And you see them 25 years later and they say, I'm writing a book. So I said, no, and I had the publisher going, come on, next bit, come on, next bit, you know. And I'd be there. Lucky I could touch type.
Yes.
I'd be there, you know, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you know, onto it. So
it didn't start with a vision, a big vision of what you've got now. It started with something smaller and then grew over time. I'm interested in the process. When Barbara moved to Canberra, she used to have something called PSAs, which I know a number of people here went to, pleasant Sunday afternoons. And she would supply champagne and people would bring chippies and olives.
And a friend, someone
and a friend
unknown.
quite often, yes, yes. And then usually at the end of the afternoon, after a few beverages, Barbara would make a speech. And it would always commence with attenzione. And maybe not always, but quite often there'd be a thing about making sure you've got proper records. And she would encourage people to give this little chant, which was date all documents, caption all photographs. And we would chant that together. How do you rate Barbara as an archivist? Because obviously you're using a lot of material. Were the documents dated and the photographs captioned, or was it much more difficult work?
You know, I think she put that formula in my milk when I was little. You know, document everything, file everything, have everything in its place. And, you know, I sort of feel terribly like I'm doing the wrong thing if things aren't in their place. But the order that she created, which is probably something that also gave me my profession of this thing of order, of getting a big problem and untangling it with the order of you solving one thing at a time. And you can only be very, very organised to do that. So she was extraordinary, how she kept everybody's letters, always had them filed, because that was one of my early jobs, you know, file the letters. You could tell by the different types of handwriting who oh, that's Max and that's Judith and that's, you know, Al or whatever. And so she kept everything. And her letters were like treasures for her, like other people would keep, I don't know, jewellery or linen tablecloths or something. They were her treasures, her letters and her documents. And then the other great thing that she did was the archival interviews that were with the National Library, which were an extraordinary help for information, first-hand information, things I could quote from people, or really get a feeling, because the thing that I was concerned about with this book was just having only my point of view or only their point of view, I wanted to create a story that gave voices to all the characters who were in it, but seeing they're all real characters, I wanted to give their real voices to it and their attitudes to it. I didn't want it to just be cream cakes full of sugar and jam and more, you know, like I wanted there to be everything in it as far as people's attitudes were concerned, as much as I could embrace that.
That's an interesting comment. Just strikes me now because one thing that Barbara was a bit of a incorrigible name dropper, and when you chatted with her, it was always about Barry Humphries, or famous painters and writers and so on. But they were never celebrities for her, and I think maybe that's something of what you've captured in these were important people, interesting people, but. You haven't dropped the names in there as look at all these people.
Well, she knew
we knew growing up.
She knew a lot that were when they were pre-celebrities.
That's right. Yeah,
that's the whole thing. They're all.
Yeah.
Their book is full of celebrities of the Australian art scene, and philosophers and writers and poets and musicians, but they're all in a sort of incubating state. They're all the pre. That this is before everybody's sort of. Are the stars or legends or the sort of headliners that they later became, the blue chip investments, that they later became. They were then, I don't want to say the struggling artists, but they were the determined artists and writers. They knew that's what they wanted to do, and they didn't want the sort of ordinariness of life to get in the way. They dealt with that ordinariness in whichever way that they could. But they had this sort of, not a higher purpose, but sort of their missions almost.
That determination is a really interesting comment for me. So, I've known a lot of, artists and aspiring artists and so on, and there's this thin group of them who have this incredible drive, which I think probably your dad had in... It maybe even before he thought he was going to become an artist, where, we have someone at the dinner table who can't but help themselves grab the pizza box and start drawing on it or something along those lines. And it seems like your dad and many other people who became well-known artists had that incredible artistic drive right from the beginning. Would you say that?
I think so. I think they all had a bit of, St Francis of Assisi getting the calling kind of thing. They were just... They knew that is what they were, and it's not what they wanted to be. They knew that's what they were, and it was finding a way to do it, and particularly with this group of people, finding a way to make what they were doing come to the public.
Yeah.
Like get people to notice that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So and they invented all different sorts of, ways to do that.
Yeah.
And Barbara was extraordinarily inventive in her. She was good at taking over and becoming the administrator of things, and then very inventive in the way that she did things. So I remember meeting an old school friend once, and I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Oh, I'm in PR." And I said, "How do you How did you work out what to do?" She said, "I got it from your mother." I said, "What do you mean from your mother?" She said, "I saw your mother. She took a piece of paper out of a waste paper bin, took it out, unfolded it and said, 'That's a letter from so-and-so to so-and-so. That's a manuscript. That's worth a And she started a manuscript collection of 100 manuscripts from the most renowned authors and journalists and writers and essayists and poets of Australia, and sold it to one of the wealthiest people in Australia, who then toured it and I think has donated it. All out of something she pulled out of the bin.
Yeah. Yeah, and also an ability to pass those things on as well when she'd finished with them. So things like Radio for the Print Handicapped, taking to a certain point, moving on, and other things as well.
Yeah.
Just talking a bit more about the writing of the book. I guess in reading it, I'll read you a few little snippets here and there. Her writer's closet of forgotten words is one phrase. With two 17-year-old sons, this is quite relevant for me. Like odd socks, finding a plausibly matching partner. Methodical Presbyterian upbringing, little kind of half pun with Methodism and Presbyterianism. Her failing eyesight left her ravenous for readers, and a composite of creatives. Any of those phrases to me could have been written by Barbara. I'm just
Yeah, but they weren't.
What's that?
They weren't. They were written by me.
I know, but it's her influence.
Yeah, I think she did.
your writing
And I think
style.
it was always, the question with Barbara was before she said, hello, what's your name? What do you do? It would be, what book are you reading?
you reading, yeah.
So it was, literature was very important. I came from a very sort of literate-minded home.
Yeah.
And wasn't really quite sure how to write this book because I know it's very à la mode to have quite a simple writing, what Barbara referred to as Jack and Jill writing.
Yeah.
But I came across a South American book that a woman had written about her mother, and her mother was quite a sort of an ordinary mother, what we'd see as an ordinary mother, but somehow she could untangle all the complexity of this woman, and with a slightly more flora than usual language. And because I do speak quite a large portion of my time in Spanish, I sort of felt that kind of floridness would be good in describing. There's no way I could describe these people or these times or the events that were happening in a simple way.
Yeah.
It wasn't the way to do it. So, and often when I read the words in the research, it was done in a simple way. I definitely did not want Wikipedia language.
No, and you haven't got
Bar-
that, and it's not over the top either. It's really got a lovely balance.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did Charles also influence the way in which you write?
Well, he would, because he'd have his sort of one-liners and his snapbacks, or when you're getting too involved and too sentimental, to come out and say, you'd have like the introduction that Emma gave. Then it made me feel like saying, hey, we should have all got a sleeping bag at the door if we're going to hear everything they did. He had this sort of slightly comical approach. So I wanted to keep some things light in it. There's nothing worse than the reader going, oh yeah, maybe I'll start the next chapter. I wanted to draw people in, make it exciting, because it was such an exciting time that I'm writing about, and such extraordinary people. I wanted the writing to sort of show that, have that tension, and have that nostalgia, and have that sort of sadness, and I wanted that to be in it as well, just in the writing style.
And you've done it. Yeah. Something else I was interested in. I think we all bring, our previous selves to whatever job we're doing at a particular point. So I'm a public servant and I work on policy for legislation. But my background, my first degree was in ancient languages. I did Sanskrit and ancient Greek and religious studies. So I studied Indian religious traditions and so on. And in one sense, you think, gosh, what's it got to do with each other? But every way, when you get a draft piece of legislation and how you analyse it from a linguistic perspective and your sort of philosophical ideas you can bring into your policy work and so on, it's all relevant. Now, we sort of touched on your training, but I thought maybe you want to share a little bit about studying in Florence and what your study was and what your ongoing practice includes.
Yeah, so I did have one of those St Francis moments with fine art conservation, and in some ways when I applied for my first job, it was in a private gallery, a commercial gallery that I think was one of the only galleries in Australia that sold commercially Indigenous artworks.
Yep.
And so I started caring for the artworks then. When I saw the bark paintings leaning against each other, I looked at the owner of the gallery and I said,
No.
this is not good. See those Mimi spirits? They'll come and get you. I didn't even know what Mimi spirits were, but anyway. So I started working with conservation a bit there, and then I had my calling in Florence on a train. I was sitting on a train and I met, I was staying at Arthur Boyd's place outside of Florence. I was going into Florence to see art. I met this woman on the train, and she was from Oxford University. And she was in Oxford University. If you learn a language, your secondary languages, you have to go and spend a couple of months in each place in Europe and get the level up. So she was going to Florence to learn Italian. And I said, great. do you mind if I copy that? And we shared a room in the, it was called Hotel Esperanza in Via dell'Inferno, which means the Hotel of Hope in the Street of Hell in Florence. And I studied Italian, and I just, it came to me, this is my calling. I have to come here, because there were two places you could study restoration then, fine art restoration, which were Canberra or Florence.
And which institution in
My
Florence?
choice was purely on the coffee.
Okay.
So
And this was at the Uffizi? Or
I went to
Uffizi?
Florence. So it was the people who worked at the Uffizi who were our teachers, because they worked there in the morning, and in the afternoon we were taught by them. And extraordinary people, and a lot of them are still there, and I still know. Beautiful people. And then I went to, after I graduated from there with flying colours, I went to Valencia, and I worked in the National Gallery there on Gothic and Renaissance paintings, mainly. I think they kind of had me of this person who lived from a long way away, so that if I did really big jobs that other people would not do, they'd go, oh no, that's too hard, I wouldn't do that. And I'd go, I'll do it. And they'd give me these sort of quite big things to do. So I worked there for a long time. I went up with colleagues to the National Gallery in London, where we learnt a lot, and then they worked out that I'd be good as an interpreter for conferences and things, because I knew the language. And so I did a bit of that. And then I started representing Spain in Europe when we were all trying to get, with the Bologna process, trying to get education on the same level all around Europe, so people could do the Erasmus. I don't know if people know what that is, but you spend 6 months from a European university in another one in another country. And a lot of young Europeans do that. So we were working on getting all their education on the same level, which is very complicated. I was there for a bit representing Spain, but it's a very complex thing.
So with that training, and you still have a restoration practice in Australia and do some really interesting work. Did that sort of influence how you prepared the book? Is it like a work of restoration of a time period?
I think so. I think
going
it
too
was,
far with the analogies there? Or?
I think that when there were big pieces missing, it was that was the challenge. That was probably the challenge for me, because people go, oh, it's great, all the photos. I said, I don't have any photos. I don't have any photos of anything. I don't have, even up to when I moved back to Australia 10 years ago, all those photos are still in Spain. Like, I don't have anything. And all my childhood ones were wrecked in a flood. So I started saying, okay, well, where am I going to find photos? And I'd ask people, and they'd go, oh, no, we haven't got anything. Or we haven't. So I started sort of searching, and I must say that some of the pictures in here have come from me with my iPhone, with a film on TV and my iPhone going, click.
Oh, really? Right.
Minute, 1 second, tick. And they did a miraculous job of turning that around and making it, a viable thing to publish. But that was a challenge. But in the end, I think I got enough. And really one of the last places, the last bus stop on my journey, I came here to the National Library and went through Barbara's papers, and there were, I think, 3 boxes, and some of them had sketches by Charles, and I thought, oh, and I could take iPhone photographs. I did some of those, and they went into some of the columns, and there's even a beautiful one of Joy Hester sketching on the ground like that. And I thought, that era, that time, can only be one person. And so they all went in. We're up to 3rd pages or something with the publisher, but they all went in, and so that's beautiful that they're embellishing the story,
All right. Well, let's get to know Charles and Barbara a little bit, and maybe start with the sort of one generation up, because there was obviously something in common where they both had very influential mothers and fathers who are absent in different ways and so on. Can you tell us a bit about Charles's parents to start with?
Well, Charles had was a family of four. Was at one stage 5, but a child was lost at childbirth, which is relevant because my father was just given that child's birth certificate, which was a bit complicated, made life a bit complicated. But his mother was quite a theatrical and sort of emotionally charged person. His father was a very loving man, bit too loving. So his marriage to my grandmother kind of overlapped with his next marriage. One day, my grandmother said, "Oh, look, you know, he hadn't come home from work," and so she rang up work and said, "Is Charles there?" He had the same name as my father, and they said, "Oh, he's not. He's on his honeymoon. He married the boss's daughter," and so.
Okay.
She said, "Well, this is his wife and 4 kids at home waiting." So she had to struggle quite a lot as a single mum with bringing up 4 kids, and sometimes couldn't. So she would put him into the ward of the state, which is when he'd be separated from his sisters. So he had a feeling of abandonment from both sides, really, and I think it affected him enormously as a child. And his sisters, all their lives, you know, they were affected by that, and probably was a massive influence on a lot of things in his life. But he left school when he was 13, which was quite normal then, that people left school at 13 and went into apprenticeships. So he'd started drawing, and his mother thought, "Oh, well, you know, it might be good for art." So he went into an art cadetship he went into as a copy boy at the Herald, and then went into the art department and things. So he started going to night school and learning how to learning more about art, and that's when he decided to seek out the artistic crowd of Australia and went up to Brisbane. So
in the meantime,
Barbara
yeah,
was born in Brisbane, and she was... my grandmother had married quite late because her beau had been killed in Gallipoli, and so she met someone quite late, and she was almost 40 when she was pregnant with my mother and her sister. They were twins, and when she was 7 months pregnant, she went to give her husband a kiss goodbye, and I think because the dog felt threatened or something, because it was a family dog, and it attacked her, and she fell back, had the babies at 7 months. And my aunt survived for 2 weeks. And my mother was put into they didn't have humidity cribs, so they put her in a crib with pure oxygen and cotton wool to keep her warm, and that was how she lost her sight. But she didn't lose it then, she lost it gradually, but it meant the atrophy of the optic nerve. So she was brought up, her father died quite young. When he knew that he didn't have long to live, he took my mother and my daughter to live with the Bachala people in the Pumicestone Passage near Bribie Island. And he was acquainted with them because he was a topographer, which is, you know, people who measure, I can't remember what they're called, surveyor, a surveyor. And so the Bachala people welcomed him when in his state into their culture, their life, their families, and they lived there for, I think, about 6 months or
Yeah.
something. And I think that would have had a big effect on Barbara, on her, the way she shared things, the way her laughter, her sense of humour, her attitude to a lot of things. Anyway, she lost her father not long after that. And during the war, she went to live in a big boarding house, which was full of sort of male boarders. And so in a lot of ways, between having had lost her sister and her father and losing her sight, she was thrown more into sort of, I mean, she went to university and did child psychology, but she was thrown more into the world of words and
Yep.
a literary world, which she believed that was the world of her father as well. Anyway,
One thing that was very interesting with her, for a person who couldn't see, was a way in which she did maintain a visual memory. And, you know, I've read about other people who have lost their eyesight, you know, as young adults and so on. And after a time, they quite often enter this state of deep blindness where they don't remember what sight was like. And obviously everybody's experience of disability is different. But with Barbara, she had quite a strong visual sense. You could see it in the clothes that she wore. She would sometimes try and get me to match up her clothes, which is quite unfortunate because I'm colourblind. But I'd also find from time to time I'd be going through a book with her, like a you know, an exhibition catalogue or something like that. I'd start to describe one of Charles's paintings, and I would say what it was called. It didn't ring a bell. And then I'd start to describe it, and then she would describe the rest to me. So this is something that she may have partly seen when she was a much, much younger woman, or maybe even only ever had it described to her. But she did maintain quite a remarkable visual memory as well, I thought.
I think she, there was a big difference, because I remember her going to a conference and saying, of the Royal Blind Society, as it was, Vision Australia was called then, and she came back with all these stories about how different people who'd suddenly regained sight, or people who'd been born, you know, without any sight, and yeah, like I said, regained it and just been mesmerised in front of the fruit shop watching the guy and pile up the oranges, or gone to a classical concert and said, oh, what a disappointment, we thought they'd all be there going like this, and they're just like that, you know.
Yes, okay, yeah.
And then the other thing about the thing of dressing was that I remember my mother, you could always tell who'd taken her shopping by the types of clothes she'd have. But sometimes she got really comfortable shoes. She'd get, oh, can I have that? What other colours have you got? And I have them in red and green and yellow, and, you know. And then she'd turn up all dressed and she'd have one red shoe and one yellow shoe. So.
Okay, yes. Didn't always work. And Barbara always spoke very fondly of her mother and said she was the most wonderful woman, but also a wonderful straight man, is what she said. So from your days living in London, when Gert would come and visit, Spike Milligan apparently used to like coming round because he could throw the jokes at her, and her straight batting of whatever he said was always so hilarious. And also is the person, I understand, that Les Patterson was named after. So
she was, because she used to, I mean, she was maybe a little bit straight in some ways, my grandmother. I mean, she was born in 1887 or something. Yeah. And so sometimes with Barry Humphries, he'd say something and my mother would say, don't tell Mrs. Patterson, don't tell Mrs. Patterson that. And and Barry would say, we need one Les Patterson in the room. And that's how Les Patterson, the name came up, the cultural attaché from Queensland.
Okay.
It's like...
All right. Look, we've got about 5 more minutes, and I've over-prepared as usual, but I just wanted to sort of touch on Charles and Barbara's relationship, because this is a love story, and wondering if you wanted to just sort of reflect on what that early relationship was probably like, and
I might
read a bit.
Yeah, I might just read one of the letters which is reproduced in the beginning of the book. They've just done a beautiful job with such an enormous amount of material, I must say. Darling B, here is a note torn from the depths of a painter's fanatic mind. It is so hard for me to make contact. My energies are obsessed with paintings. The problems are endless, chain upon chain. My personality is completely sucked under. For I'm a shimmering mass of intense energy, carving a steady path into myself. The word love is mild. I am yours, Charles. So, you know, he was good with words too,
Good with words,
not just pictures.
Was Barbara, I mean, it's a word that's often used, was Barbara his muse, or was it something more than that?
I think Barbara was his muse for almost 3 decades, and, you know, probably in his mind longer.
Did she, like, the creative energy was obviously already there. Did she increase it? Did she channel it? What was the...
I think it was the meeting of both of them, because this is what we didn't get to anyway. You have to read it in the book. They
Plenty to be discovered, I assure
when
you.
they met.
Christmas is coming. Yep.
And they used to say it. He'd say it in interviews. He'd say, between two people who are sort of not quite there, together we make a unit that works. Yeah. And so he was able to fill up the images with images what she was missing in his descriptions, and at the same time she would sort of describe them back to him,
Yep.
giving them the meaning.
Yep.
And she also introduced him to literature in a way that he was not familiar with, and it's not the same to say, oh, you can go and read the classics, get the little thing, to the very deep and extraordinary voyage into literature that they had. And into poetry and philosophy. I mean, all those things. My father used to call himself a gutter snipe, and she was a blue stocking. You know, he sort of would strut into places, and I'm the original hippie kind of thing. But when he met her in her mind, that was like, that's what I'm missing. Yeah. And the same as Barbara with him. So it was an extraordinary union, an extraordinary love story that a lot of people live their lives and don't, know such depths of love, really. It's rare. Yeah. So there's the story of their love, but also the story of that, how they could have sort of complemented each other and how they sort of did push each other into their extremes, like, you want to go there? Come on, go. They were fantastic like that. Not only the encouragement and support and endorsement of each other, but, when they do first meet, she says to him, like, if you meet someone and you fall in love with them, you don't say, okay, off you go. You say, I want you here, like, I'll give any excuse in the world for you to be here. But she said, no, you need to be in Melbourne. That's where all the artists are. Yeah. That's where the people you have to meet. And that's why we got the letters. And then the letters are just the unfolding of the story of that decade. So, yeah.
All right, look, we're at 10:02 and we're going to have a bit of question time now. But let me say, you'll be signing afterwards. As I say, Christmas is coming. Lovely gift. It's a beautiful book, and you must be entering your 40s now. And just sorry you didn't start writing earlier. Is there going to be a chapter 2? You're going to do the London period?
That'd be nice.
No. All right. So maybe if we open up for questions, please don't ask until you've got a microphone. Is there anyone who'd like to ask Christabel something?
Well, that's
Have we covered it all? It's always the first person. Here we go.
How have First of all, thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation, and I commend everybody who put the backdrop up. It's sensational, absolutely sensational. You don't have to answer this, but I'm just curious about how the rest of your family reacted to your writing. Often families have different points of view, and I wondered how that landed when they knew you were writing this story.
Oh, I just really wish I could hear you better.
Oh, I'll try again. I can speak louder. I was just curious about how the rest of your family reacted to the writing of the story. It's not... There are different points of view.
Oh,
just curious.
Really, my brother, when I showed him the book, he burst into tears. He gave me a big hug and he goes, "I'm so glad you've done it. I'm so glad you've done it," because I felt an obligation. I really felt an obligation. I had to tell this story. I think I'd read somewhere in someone's book something that wasn't right. And I said, I might not get it all right, but I'll probably get it a bit less wrong than other people. So I really felt that. And then the other people, I really started writing it when my brother Barnaby died, because I felt, hey, I can't put this off anymore because I could be next, so I better do it. And so in a lot of ways, perhaps he was my muse of doing it. And then all other family members, because my father went on and married 2 more times. And I have another 2 brothers and a sister. And then I have my children. And then I have other nieces and nephews. And it's like, everybody, this is your story. So they are so happy because a lot of them are younger and have not known these great people in this time. They've known them perhaps in more fragile times when they're older and not able to be part of their grandchildren's lives or even their own children's lives. So it's fantastic for them to be able to have this story. And I also felt in some ways, I must say, that a bit, if I write it, maybe Barbara might not like it. But then I actually had some Indigenous friends who said, your ancestors' stories are your stories. So this is my story. And when I give this book to my other family members and younger family members, I say, this is your story. And it's important that we know that. This is where we come from. And so they have all been, my whole family's been really embracing I wouldn't have been able to reproduce all of these images if it wasn't for all my brothers and my sister and my nieces giving permission to do so. So they've all, been a great contribution. And now that I'm here, there's no way I could have done this book without my beautiful partner who's here, who's just incredible support and really looked after me, so much. And was encouraging, because I'd just get to moments where I'd go, I'm not doing it, I've had it, that's enough. And, he was just extraordinary, yeah.
I think we had another question around here somewhere.
Thank you. The 1950s and that period was, very conservative in Australia, and a lot of artistic people, including, say, Barry Humphries, ended up, moving to London and Europe. But it sounds to me as if your parents spent more time in Australia. It's like, how did that come about?
Well, so it's a post-war period where people are re-identifying what it is to be Australian. They are defining the Australian identity in a lot of ways, culturally. That's what's happening in this period. Until really the prizes came along. Helena Rubinstein, who was born in Melbourne, apparently, and who was, had the big cosmetic tycoon, and she had taken an interest in the arts. And she started giving people, Australian artists, a prize. There was a prize to go to London for 6 months. And it was like a catapult. Every year one would go over, boom, boom, and they meant to go there for 6 months. And they all just stayed there. Yeah. They all just stayed there. And all the Arthur Boyd was there, Fred Williams was there, Colin Lansley was there. They're all there. We all lived in the same area together, We'd all see each other. And it sort of... I think they're all hoping to have international success, which they did in a lot of ways. They all show, but then they realised you could only show in London galleries sort of once every 2 years, not more than that. And then they were having success here, and really the weather got too cold, and it was, it sort of called Charles and Barbara back, and a lot of other artists started coming back at the same time. So it was the early 60s that they, that sort of excitement, that new era, you're getting rock and roll and the first E-type Jag and all these sort of exciting things happening, and the mini skirt, everything's happening in London. But I think they also start putting the excitement into their paintings, but that's the 60s, the next book, maybe.
All right. We've got time for one more question. Here we are.
I just wanted to share that Barbara told me when they got back to Australia that Charles had actually told her, said, look, there isn't art here, so we've got to do our own. And Barbara took that very, very to heart. Just one thing I was going to ask you, Christabel, is your parents were so amazing together, and they just were such a amazing catalyst for each other, but they were also amazing apart. I mean, when they were no longer together, they still thrived. And I just wonder if you could just say something about that. Just, their time apart, even though they had 30 amazing years together.
It's, someone asked me, why did you write about just the 50s? So I said, well, that's just the beginning. And, it's actually one period, because the love story, as I said, went on. And in this book, I've tried to include a lot of different friendships with people as well, that are often kernel friendships that have gone on for their whole lives. So they were extraordinary together, and they were extraordinary apart, and extraordinary in other relationships that they had. Barbara was married to Marcel Veldhoven for 10 years. And they did extraordinary things with their sort of esoteric studies, and the mud brick architect, and all these incredible things. And Charles went on and married Genevieve de Couvre, and went on to paint extraordinary paintings and do opera and ballet sets with Australian Ballet, and and even when they were together, they were doing things apart. I mean, it's not that they're things that they're creating was always together. Barbara was writing and poetry and essays, and so it was, as she said, much of a muchness. Always sort of highly creative, and creative cooks and creative. I mean, they were sort of got to a stage where they were la mode, and the Woman's Weekly would come around and photograph us in Vogue and all of this, and they'd say, they've painted all the walls white, just hung with paintings, and, they've got bricks on the floor, and, it was like all this. So they were sort of, kind of influences, like from way back, from really early. And they were, they were icebreakers. They were all icebreakers. They were up against the not against the establishment, but okay, we're doing something else. You know, we want the world to know about it because this is important. We're painting important things. We're writing about important things, the emotions, and we're helping you define who you are. And this is what they felt that Australia needed, and time has proved them all right.
Right, yes. All right, look, we're at 7 o'clock, so I think, Emma, are you going to sort of close up? So thank you again for a wonderful book. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you as always. And,
Thank you, Jeremy.
No,
That
not
was
at all.
beautiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Christabel and Jeremy, for such an engaging and thoughtful discussion. And please do write Volume 2. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening at the National Library on beautiful Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I hope that, I'm sure that many of you are as keen to enhance your Christmas present and stocking list this evening. So in good news, copies are available to purchase from the National Library bookshop upstairs, and Christabel will be available for signings. I highly recommend the book. I had intended to read the entire thing for tonight, but I've actually read half because I don't want it to finish. So I limit myself to a few pages each night so I can extend it. It's like a warm embrace. It's just wonderful. So I'd ask you all to make your way upstairs. National Library staff are available to assist you. Thank you all again for coming, and have a lovely night.